From entering Formula One as a 17-year-old to winning 2 championships in a row, Max Verstappen is easily one of the most talented drivers on the grid, and yet everyone hates him. Why? Well, it could be that he's just too good. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? If you're so gifted that you don't let anyone else get near you, then you're bound to have haters. For instance, Lewis Hamilton is a 7-time world champion, but people still say he doesn't deserve any of them, all because he had a fast car. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? So that hate toward the Dutchman could very well be a similar thing. Take his career until now, for example.
Lewis Hamilton is now a pit stop behind Max Verstappen, who hasn't pitted yet. So if Verstappen comes in and pits, he should still get out ahead of Lewis Hamilton.
First, he's the son of a former F1 driver, Jos Verstappen. Okay, that's the privilege box checked. And then he was also promoted to the sport at only 17 years of age. Now, was it talent or did his dad pull some strings to make it happen? That being said, you can't deny that he hasn't been fast ever since. Seriously, the guy is the youngest F1 Grand Prix champion and the second youngest world champion. That's insane. But again, apparently not good enough.
I think this was the most complete race.
Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton would have.
Some people think he's being overly favored by the team and all that. I mean, sure, even if you do believe that, he's still driving that car out on track, right? Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but those race-winning Red Bull cars didn't just race themselves to the checkered flag. Although, of course, this is only a part of the story. After all, Verstappen isn't the angel his fans make him out to be either. In fact, his on-track antics can be a bit too much sometimes.
Verstappen's got the restart sorted! The Brazilian Grand Prix goes to Max Verstappen a year after he finished second and had it taken away in his redemption day.
Yep, he may be fast, but he's not exactly clean. Oh, and you don't even have to dig in to prove that. All you gotta do is look at the history of all the crashes he's had.
The right amount of grip, and then in a frustration, he's still hit the throttle and banged both parts of the suspension. He's got a broken wishbone.
He rarely ever makes a mistake on the racetrack, and every single time he crashes, it's because of a collision with another car. The 2021 season was perhaps the best example of this. It was him versus Hamilton for the title, and of course, both of them traded blows, but there was something strange about that fight. They rarely ever had a clean encounter. Seriously, every single time Hamilton and Verstappen got wheel-to-wheel on track, someone would lose out as a result of a collision. Now, obviously, I'm not saying all of these were his fault, but there was a notion developed that if you're fighting Max for the win and you try to overtake him on the racetrack, there are only 2 possible outcomes. You either yield or you crash, and that made it almost impossible for anyone to take him on.
Racing incidents.
I wonder what the stewards will think about Lewis.
Could Hamilton have done anything to give Max Verstappen room there and avoid that crash? He was on the inside, of course.
It was too risky, and for some reason, he didn't seem to get penalized for it either. Yeah, you can see why that'd be frustrating, right? But of course, that's not the only on-track reason for people to dislike him, because the truth is, Verstappen is also a bad teammate. I mean, where do I even begin with this? Even when he was super new to the sport, it still felt like he was never a team player. He was always fighting Daniel Ricciardo, crashing into him, or, well, just being a bad sport. And the situation only got worse as time got on. Honestly, the team had a role to play in this too. They treated him as a special, once-in-a-generation talent, which, to be fair, he definitely is. It's just that when you do that in a competitive sport like F1 and give one driver that much preference, they're bound to think that rules don't apply to them. Like, we all saw how Danny Rick exited the team because of his treatment, right? And the situation only got worse with time, especially when Red Bull allegedly started developing its cars to suit Max's driving style. Now, was it an efficient tactic? Sure, but fair? Absolutely not. What really sealed the deal on this belief, however, was the 2022 Brazilian Grand Prix.
Take the speed through the first few corners.
Daniel Ricciardo makes contact there with Kevin Magnussen, and there's a second contact, and they're both out of the race.
Verstappen and Perez were running 6th and 7th, and while the Dutchman had already won the championship, Sergio needed some extra points to claim 2nd in the standings. So all he needed was Max to cede his 6th place. Sounds simple enough, right? I mean, it's not like being 6th or 7th would have made a difference for the champ. And yet, guess what he said when the team asked him to let Perez through? Of course, he refused. And honestly, it almost sounded like Verstappen was a spoiled brat. Seriously, imagine not giving up 6th place to help your teammate. Oh, and mind you, he absolutely owed that first title to Sergio. After all, if he hadn't blocked Hamilton for that long, who knows how that race in Abu Dhabi would have panned out. And it's not even in terms of his teammate.
If he's quicker, we let 3.
That's very unfair, but okay.
Well, that's the instruction, isn't it? That Max will pass you, Sergio.
This attitude extends toward other drivers too. Max always feels like he's entitled to something. But of course, in a competitive sport, you only get what you've earned. So while getting your elbows out on track is great and everything, I'm not sure that turning every single overtake into a 50-50 chance of either being a crash or utter perfection is great either. It's almost as if he truly believes every other car should step out of his way and let him pass. And if they don't, he can just simply shove them out of the way. With that said, Verstappen's antics off the track might be even worse. After all, he is super ignorant when it comes to social justice issues. And honestly, you can ignore all the dangerous driving, but you can't ignore this. Now, obviously, it's understandable when someone decides to not actively engage with the political side of things. Verstappen's responses to these issues, however, make it seem like he just doesn't care. Like when he refused to take part in Hamilton's campaign against racism. You know what he said? "I'm committed to anti-racism in other, different ways." What does that even mean?
Every black kid in the world will at some stage experience racism. It's just a fact.
Plus, remember when his girlfriend's father, Nelson Piquet, used racist language against Hamilton? Again, it's understandable if he wants to distance himself from the situation, but his response there was also pretty tone-deaf, saying Piquet wasn't being racist. Oh, and if being ignorant wasn't bad enough, then he's used derogatory language before as well. Yep, his quote-unquote jokes can be really weird at times. Want an example? Well, look no farther than a fan Q&A he had with his teammate Perez. Someone asked what the best purchase he'd made was, and you know what he said? "My girlfriend." Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound right to me. He then proceeded to laugh and say that it was actually a house he bought for his mom. Though again, why would you make that comment in the first place? Now, if you want another instance, then all you've got to do is remember the time he called Lance Stroll a Mongol just because of a collision, which, again, is super problematic. Oh, and let's not forget his misogynistic comments about grid girls. I mean, that's been the story of his career, to be fair. He comes off as awkward in interviews, and he rarely ever says the right thing. Oftentimes he's rude, insulting people for no reason whatsoever. Other times he just makes these derogatory statements, and even when he makes any of his supposed jokes, they're just not very tasteful. I guess you could say that he's only human and is also prone to making mistakes. But when you've got a platform as he has, with people looking up to you and all that, then you just can't afford to be ignorant toward this stuff. But hey, he's still an incredible driver, right? Right? Well, on that note, these were some of the reasons why everyone hates Max Verstappen. See you in the next one.